I was sick for the whole day. When I looked at myself in the glass, I saw a gray face. I was like a dead body. So I went to Harley Street to see my doctor. I was too ill to think about the cost of the visit. Dr. Franklin Roth took a quick look at me and made the usual tests. He told me that I had it. Yes, I had jaundice. Jaundice? I cried.
Yes. Compete rest in hospital for 4 weeks.
He said. I told him that I could not afford an expensive place. He telephoned to several places, and I heard the word jaundice every time. He found me a bed in a hospital somewhere beyond Shoreditch. I took a taxi back to my room, where I picked up some clothes and a few books. Then I went to Shoreditch. It was a cold gray day, and the hospital looked terrible. It was built of red bricks and had rows of high little windows. A tall Indian, who spoke very exactly, examined me. He pushed his fingers into my stomach. He asked me how old I was. He wanted to know the dates of all my old illnesses. I was too weak to talk much.
When you were a boy,
He said.
did you have this disease or that disease?
I answered him very shortly. They wrapped me up in something warm, and I was taken to another part of the hospital. My room was called a cubicle. It was on the ground floor, and through its window I could see some grass. I got into bed in the cubicle and fell asleep immediately. I woke up hours later. Sunlight was pouring over me, and voices could be heard in the hall. The cubicle had glass walls, which separated me from other infectious men. It was like lying in a shop window. People walked slowly past, and looked carelessly at me. There were 2 glass doors, and I saw some curtains on them, but the curtains were pulled back, and so I got out of bed to close them. Suddenly a very small nurse rushed in.
You mustn't get out of bed,
She said. I just wanted to draw the curtains.
Curtains are not allowed to be drawn in the daytime. You must stay in bed. This rule is for infectious people. They stay in bed at all times.
She arranged the bedclothes.
Never get out of bed here,
She said. She marched out of the cubicle. My mouth was dry, and I looked round for some kind of bell. I wanted to call the nurse back, but there was no bell. I saw her rushing through the hall, and I waved to her. She gave me one look and walked past the door. She saw me clearly, but did not come in. There was a tap in the corner of the cubicle, and so I waited. Soon I was sure that nobody was looking. I got out of bed and took some water from the tap.
I told you before that you are not allowed out of bed.
She had caught me. I had to have a drink of water.
That tap is not for you. It is for doctors and nurses. They have to wash their hands before leaving the cubicle. You are infectious, and you must not use that tap.
But I tried to catch your attention. You saw me waving, didn't you?
I am on afternoon duty now. I'm busy. Drinking water is given at tea time. It is not my work. You must ask another nurse.
She arranged the bedclothes, washed her hands at the tap, and marched out.
Well, good afternoon. Is everything all right?
A young man with a sharp nose was standing by the door. He had absolutely no hair. His hands were held together as if he was praying. I rolled over to the other side of the bed. "No," I said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He said.
What's the trouble?
"That nurse is the trouble. She wants to hurt. She likes giving pain. Tell her to stay out of this cubicle."
But she has to come in here. It's her work.
"She comes in, and she's very rude. She wouldn't even bring me a glass of water. She said I must ask at tea time."
I'm sorry about that.
He looked confused.
I'll speak to her.
He fixed the curtains and looked out of the window. Then he started praying again and left. A woman came in to clean the cubicle.
"That's Mr. Ophi,"
she said.
"He's in charge here. Such a nice man."
She was wearing a dull green dress and cap. She cleaned the entire cubicle in a few minutes. Before she left, she turned to speak. She spoke like someone from the middle of Europe.
"It's all right.
She said.
It's not bad here after a time."
Evening came with a special meal for someone with jaundice. There was no fat in the food, only some cold wet chicken. They gave me a cold drink an hour later, and the lights went out. The next morning someone shook my arm at 6 o'clock and put a cup of tea on the table. Then, an hour later, another nurse arrived. I hadn't seen her before. She gave me a wash with some water, which was almost cold. Wonderfully, she kept the bed dry, but I was soon as cold as ice. I told myself that it was all Dr. Roth's fault. While I was thinking about him, Mr. Ophi came in. He brought with him an Indian doctor called Lapel. Another man came too, a Dr. Dillman. He seemed to be important. He was one of those who were in charge of the whole hospital. They stood at the foot of my bed while Mr. Ophi closed all the curtains. They had a look at my chest.
Good morning, and how are you today?
Said Dr. Dillman. He was fat and about 70. I feel terrible, I said.
Yes, you are a bit yellow, aren't you? But not severely so.
He put his thumb under my eye and examined my chest. He said something softly to himself. He felt my stomach and wrote a note in his notebook. He whispered to Lapel.
Mr. Ophi has told me that you've complained about a nurse. Is that true?
Dillman was standing at the foot of the bed. Yes, I did complain about her. She was rude and unhelpful.
Nobody has ever complained before about our nurses. This one especially has a spotless record. I think you made a mistake. You imagined that she was rude to you. People who are ill often imagine things.
The blood was beating in my head. That's the important thing, I said. I am ill, and she hasn't been helpful at all. She was very rude.
When people have jaundice, they easily get angry. You must understand that.
I'm sure you're right, I said. Therefore, a nurse ought to be more helpful than usual.
I have every reason to believe that this is a very good nurse.
How do you know? I asked. Has she ever taken care of you when you were ill? I'm telling you she's rude. She won't do anything to help. I don't want her in here again.
We cannot change our plans just to suit you.
He was looking straight at me.
I want you to apologize to her.
I will not apologize to her. I did nothing wrong.
She deserves an apology from you. You've made her angry.
I've made her angry. What are you trying to do? Do you always fight those who come into this hospital?
You're not the sort of young man that I like,
he said. Oh.
And I don't want your sort of person in here.
And don't want you in my cubicle, I cried. This is my cubicle. So get out. All of you. Mr. Opie was anxiously pressing his hands together when he led the two doctors out. I didn't know what would happen next. I was quite frightened. I did not really want to stay there, but probably it was as good as any other hospital. I didn't like the idea of changing at that time. The next day, Dr. Roth came in wearing a white coat.
This isn't a bad place,
he said. But he came in here and started an argument. He wanted me to apologize to a nurse. I had complained about her.
Now listen. He's an old man and will soon retire. You've offended him. If you want to stay here, you'll have to apologize. If you don't, he can make life quite nasty for you.
Roth was a clever man. He could smooth out difficult situations. It was clear that he had calmed Dr. Dillman's hurt feelings. He had made it easy for me to apologize. So I swallowed my pride and asked to speak to him. Dr. Dillman acted as if he had forgotten my rudeness. He accepted my apology and offered his best wishes for a quick return to health. When the storm had ended, I began reading and writing letters. It was clear that I was going to stay in the hospital. I even made conversation with the nurse. At about 10:30 every morning Berta came in. She had a cloth in her hand and began to clean the room. It never got very dusty, but she cleaned it carefully. Her hair was pushed under her nurse's cap. With wild eyes she dusted the room. She worked like a young girl although she was 40.
It is so wonderful, the sun. It brings light into my heart. And the beautiful flowers,
she said. She was watering a plant which had been sent to me. Yes, it's a nice day, I said. I did not look up from my book.
8 months. 8 more long English months.
What happens in 8 months? I asked. I put the book down.
Then we will be free.
She turned towards me and waved the dust cloth.
Free to see the mysteries of the East.
Are you going to the East?
Yes. But I must wait first for my property. Every day I write to my mother in Salzburg to ask the date. But now I know it will be in 8 months.
Why in 8 months?
Because she is selling it for me. It is property from before the war. It is my own property. I don't want to keep it in Salzburg. It is not my home anymore.
How long have you been away? I asked.
7 years. When I go back, it is like visiting a foreign country. It is not the same Austria. It was different when I was a child. I hate going back.
She was rubbing part of the window.
For 3 years I worked in a house in Wales. I was studying all the time. I must always improve my mind. Even now I go to night classes. When I get my property, I will stop working here. I will study all the time. Perhaps I study too much, but I want to learn.
She went quietly out of the room,
You're not as yellow as you were.
said Mr. Opie.
Lapel said you've got jaundice mildly. You might only have to stay 2 weeks.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, I said,
I'm very tired today.
said Opie.
I only had 4 hours sleep last night. I moved into a new flat and stayed up until 4:30. I was putting things in their places.
Where's the flat? I asked.
In Stepney. It has its furniture, but there are no dishes. We had to go out and buy some.
Are you sharing the flat?
Yes. I can't live alone. If I tried that, it would drive me mad. I lived here in the hospital for 2 years, but it wasn't like living alone. There was always someone here. I could meet people and talk to them.
He looked through the glass and saw Dr. Lapel, so he said that he would come back later. After he left, I slowly settled myself down. I picked up my book and began to read. Then I heard screams from the next cubicle. I saw through the glass wall a little boy. He was jumping up and down on his bed and screaming. George, the orderly, was shouting at him. George came from Spain. He put the boy into the bed by force. Then he came into my cubicle.
That Tommy is mad,
The orderly said.
he has been here too long. That is why he screams like that. 8 weeks in that cubicle. Like an animal in a cage. But he's a tough little animal. He's strong and he can scream well.
Why has he been here so long? What's the matter with him?
He's being observed. The doctor are watching him. He has been ill, and they're not satisfied.
George was short and had hair like an Italian.
Bad place for children.
He said.
Bad place for anyone. How long are you going to stay here?
About 2 weeks more.
2 weeks. No! It takes a long time. Get used to this place. If you don't, you'll soon be like Tommy. You'll be screaming like the boy. How did you get jaundice? Do you know? Too much drink. Do you drink a lot?
No, not much, I said. Isn't it some germ that a man picks up?
Yes, yes. Bus, where did you pick it up?
The orderly ran out of the cubicle. After Tommy's screaming, I did not want to read any more. I turned over and over in the bed. I wrote a foolish letter to someone I had almost forgotten. I hadn't seen him for years. The great event of the day was lunch. It was a dull meal of fish. The afternoon seemed endless. Tommy was always turning over and over in front of me. A few visitors came to see me. They were allowed to stay for half an hour, and they had to wear long white coats. The radio helped me a bit. I began waiting anxiously for Bertha's visit. She used to march into the cubicle with a joyful face. She praised the beauty of England, the joys of learning, and the wonders of travel. She watered the plant and talked about the garden of Austria. She pretended to dust the room while she was talking. She told me about her walking trips through the mountains. She described her university days in Heidelberg. She had hoped then to be a doctor. She never once looked at me straight in the eyes. She looked at the curtains or at her fingers.
4 times my fiancé was in the hospital.
She said.
Now he can only lie in bed.
What did your fiancé do before he was ill? I asked.
He worked in a hospital with electric machines. But for a long time he has not been well enough to work.
When do you think you'll get married? I asked.
Soon. We will fix a date soon. When he's well again. I tell him we will take some of my money. I mean the money from my property. Then we can make a wonderful journey together. But he says no. He is a real English gentleman. He won't use my money. But when we are married, I will persuade him. We will go to Japan.
She had brought a map of the East with her. We started planning her journey from Hong Kong to Korea. Every day we studied it together. We learned the size of the towns and the places of interest. She had also brought me 2 books about Tokyo from the hospital library. I read these carefully. I made a list of ancient buildings that she ought to visit. I marked them on the map of Japan. Bertha studied the list. One day she told me all the names on it from memory.
He will love it,
she said.
It will be wonderful for him. It will be like another world to him. If you see another civilization, you understand you better. That is what I tell him, but he laughs at me. He won't laugh when he is in one of those wonderful buildings. It will make him a new person. My poor finance will become a lot better.
She held up a book about Thailand. She said,
I will read this tonight. Tomorrow you will help me to plan a journey in Thailand, won't you?
One lazy afternoon I was lying in bed and thinking. I tried to understand why I enjoyed Bertha's visit. Then I saw Mr. Opie moving quietly towards my door.
I've been talking to Bertha,
he said.
She told me that she likes talking to you.
Well, I like talking to her,
She's a very kind woman,
he said. Yes, she is,
I feel sorry for her,
said Ophi. Why?
She's had a terrible life. She was in Austria during the war. Most of her family were killed.
She likes living in England, I said, and she'll be getting married soon,
I'm not sure about that.
he said.
I don't think her fiancé will marry her. He likes her, but he's not ready for marriage. He isn't that sort of man. He's got a good thing already, and he knows it.
What do you mean? I asked.
She has been supporting him for the last 3 years. She has taken him all over Europe twice. Once she took him to visit her family in Austria. He stayed there 6 months and paid her mother nothing. Bertha had to come back to London to her work. She sent him half her pay every week. Then she sent him a ticket to come back.
But he's ill, isn't he? I said.
Oh, yes, he's sick, but not very sick. He could do some light work if he wanted to. I was there last night, visiting them. He looked strong enough to me. He was sitting there and watching television. He was complaining about Bertha's cooking. In fact, she's a good cook.
What does he do all the time?
He just sits and watches the television. He reads stories while she's working here all day. They've been living in that room for 3 years.
She thinks he's going to marry her soon.
She's been thinking that for 3 years. If she didn't think that, she would be lost.
He turned away.
Lapel's here now. I've got to go.
I suppose that I had understood some of this before. Bertha's talk about getting married was a dream. So was the journey to the east. Perhaps the property in Salzburg was a dream too. I felt sorry about it. I liked to think of her happiness. Mr. Ophio's conversation had hit me quite hard. All my talks with Bertha were hollow now. I couldn't believe it all. I couldn't sleep that night, and I had to ask the nurse for some medicine. The next morning Bertha marched in with joyful looks.
Now I have some new clothes,
she said.
They are beautiful. I went yesterday to Mile End and bought them. I had seen them once in a shop weeks ago. They have little white flowers all over the cloth. I put them on for my fiancé to see. He said I look like a young girl.
Did you buy a hat?
No. I took my old hat and put new flowers on it. It was easy. My fiancé smiled and smiled when he saw me in the dress. He is not a man who praises much, but yesterday I could see that he was pleased. He didn't even have to say so.
She watered the plant and touched it.
Yesterday was a good day for me. Everything was good. I had a new dress. My fiancé was happy. Then, after dinner, I went to watch television with George, the orderly. Mr. Ophi came too. They have a nice flat.
Do you mean Mr. Ophi who works here?
Yes. He and George. You know the Spanish orderly. They have just moved into a flat together. It's nice and new. They're happy there.
She looked down the hall. She explained that she had not finished the Thailand book yet. As she was leaving, George rushed in. He began arranging my bed.
You're still yellow,
He said.
you look like a flower.
Thank you. I love to hear it.
But it's true. You get more yellow every day.
Dr. Lapel says I'm improving, I said.
Lapel's mad. He has bad eyes and can't see. I'm telling you. You are yellow.
George, I said, could you do something for me?
I can do some things, but not everything. What is it, yellow boy?
Cigarettes.
Cigarettes? You must ask Mr. Ophi for permission. Do you think I want to lose my place here?
You won't lose it, I said. I'll give you the money. I want to smoke.
No, you must ask Mr. Ophi. He's very severe about that.
I had to wait an hour without cigarettes until Ophi came in. He was pressing his hands together as usual.
Of course he can get them for you,
He said. I had told him that I needed some cigarettes.
He'll get them in the lunch hour. How are you feeling today?
Fine. How are you?
Not so good. I had a quarrel last night with my companion. The man who lives in the flat drives me mad. He gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He goes into the kitchen to cook. He says he can't sleep. I've got to have my rest. I have to be here at 8 o'clock every morning. Besides that, he hasn't paid any rent yet. And all the food's mine. When he cooks things at 3 o'clock, it's my food. I bought it all.
What did you do?
I told him to get out. I pay the rent, the flat's in my name. So I told him to go. I couldn't bear it anymore. Now I have to pay £6 a week myself, and living there alone drives me mad.
The orderly, George, walked in just then. They looked fiercely at each other. Then Ophi took the water bottle and left.
What did he say?
George asked. He said you can give me the cigarettes.
I knew he would say yes. But it's better to ask him. He's a nice man, but a little strange in the head. Don't you agree?
Sometimes during the day, Mr. Ophi and the orderly had to work together. This happened, for example, when they were getting meals ready. Mr. Ophi was tall and walked unsteadily. He was like a thin tree in a strong wind. Together they reminded me of a priest and a young doctor. But Mr. Ophi looked paler than usual. He rushed from one cubicle to another and repeated the story of the flat. He wanted someone else to share his flat. Bertha came in.
Tomorrow,
She said.
we shall arrange the journey through Thailand.
Her face was red. She would be hearing the bells of Bangkok all the afternoon. I could see that. Have you talked to Mr. Ophi today, Bertha? He's not very happy.
I know. It's that devil, George. He stays up too late. But I must go now and finish my work. I have to go to the class.
George came in and threw the cigarettes on the bed.
I've had enough of England,
He said.
I'll go to Germany and learn German. When I can speak English, French, and German, then I can work in my father's restaurant.
Is that what you're going to do?
What else should I do?
The orderly replied.
That is why I came here. I came to learn English so as to speak to tourists.
Why have you had enough of England?
It is all stiff like the collars. When I first came, I liked London. It seemed mad and joyful. But it's not. It's sad like a funeral. I know some other boys from Spain who are here. Every night they go to coffee house. They like that. They think London is wonderful. They all live in one little flat, 8 of them. I don't like to live like that and just drink coffee.
But why do you want to leave England?
The time has come. I speak English now, so I must leave. And I leave here now. I'm going to the cinema tonight to see Helen Shapiro. Good night, yellow boy.
He rushed down the hall and past Mr. Opie. They did not look at each other. The next morning Bertha brought me my breakfast.
It's all finished,
she said.
They've left the flat. It was a beautiful new flat and it had television.
Do you mean George and Mr. Opie?
Yes. He made George move out. Now he is selling the dishes. That mad fellow, George, spends all his money on clothes. They are not friends anymore. They don't even look at each other. It's terrible.
I thought he was going to share the flat with someone else.
He thought so, perhaps. But now he's leaving it. He's coming back to the hospital. He ought not to work here and live here too. That's no good.
I saw George rushing in and out of the cubicles. He put his head inside my door. George, come here a minute, I said. What have you decided to do?
I think I'll stay in England. I don't know why. I just think so. Perhaps tomorrow I'll change my mind.
Mr. Opie came in while I was eating lunch.
I'm leaving the flat,
he said.
I'm coming back to the hospital.
What happened to the other fellow? I mean the man who was sharing with you.
Oh, he's gone to live with some wild men from Spain.
Bertha suddenly rushed in and gave me an envelope. It looked important. It came from a London office.
It's happened,
she cried.
He's done it. He's going to marry me. Look at that envelope.
It's about a marriage, I said, confused.
Yes. I have to sign the paper. It's wonderful. I knew that it would happen soon. He wrote about it without telling me. It's a wonderful surprise. I'll have to go to the office and arrange everything. It takes 10 days. This is the happiest day for me. In 2 weeks I'll be Mrs. Johnson.
I watched her running along the hall. She waved the letter and showed it to Mr. Opie. Then she showed it to George. I was glad that Mr. Opie was wrong about her fiancé. I was glad that the news of the marriage had come then. I was going to leave the hospital the following afternoon. An hour later Bertha came in still holding the ladder.
Not for me,
she said.
It says on the envelope, Bertha Boehner. They made a mistake and gave it to me. My name is Bertha Rayner. But it's all right. I know the other Bertha. She is also an Australian who used to work here. Now she is at another hospital. I will take this to her tomorrow.
I'm sorry to hear that. A terrible mistake.
It's my fault,
she said with a brave little smile.
I ought to have looked more carefully at the envelope. And we're not ready for marriage yet. It's better for us to wait. My property will soon be sold. It will be wonderful to have some money. How many interesting buildings are there in Thailand? Where is the map?
I opened the map on which I had marked the journey. Bertha studied it for a moment and then watered the plant. I watched her pouring the water slowly into it. Bertha, I said, do you want that plant?
But it is yours,
she said. I don't want to take it home with me tomorrow. You must take it when I leave.
You will give me this wonderful plant. It will bring light into my room. And my fiancé loves flowers very much.
On the next day I left the hospital. I was warned to lie down a lot. I was told not to stand very much for a week. My room was just as I had left it 2 weeks before. I knew that I ought to stay at home. I ought to have gone to bed early, but a friend telephoned. He wanted me to go out to dinner, and I could not resist the invitation. I felt weak on my feet, but I found a bus. I climbed to the top and lit a cigarette. As the bus moved along Heating Road, I recognized a familiar figure. Bertha was walking on the other side of the street. I only saw her for a moment, because the bus rounded a corner. She was still in her green clothes. She had taken off her cap, and her hair was streaming in the wind. She looked very young and determined. She marched up Heating Road. She was carrying my yellow plant, and it was protecting her from the wind.